Actually, I'll be talking about the World Bank Group. I think it's an important point to make because supporting agriculture and agribusiness comes from both the public sector and the private sector. So a lot of what I'll talk will cover both the bank, IBRD, IDA, as well as IFC's support for agribusiness, which is also significant. In terms of the strategic framework that guides our work in this sector, it is actually addressed or governed by the World Development Report of 2008, Agriculture for Development, as well as some subsequent agricultural action plans that the World Bank Group has developed. And this actually frames the agenda, including how the bank engages with the private sector. As we know that agriculture has suffered a lot in terms of investment, but we have seen an uptick, an increase in funding. For example, within the bank group aggregate spending on agriculture increased from about $4.1 billion in the fiscal year 2006-2008. And currently it's around, projected to be around $8 to $10 billion in 2013 to 2015 fiscal year. That's significant, it's up significantly. We also see in terms of the regional distribution that Africa is increasing from about $1.5 billion in 2010-2012, and this is projected to increase to about $2.6 billion in 2013-2015. At the end of the day, really this involves investment in Africa. Will be about 25%, about a quarter of the aggregate spending on agriculture and agribusiness, which is significant considering that there are a lot of other regions that the bank is involved in. In addition to investment spending, the bank also provides analytical support in terms of knowledge advisory services across the institution that provides policy advice as well as informs investments in the sector. So the body of work that we're talking about is pretty significant. Recently, the bank did a study, and I think I had a couple of copies around Growing Africa. And one of the things that came out in this study was that the investment that we're talking about, or the opportunities, are significant, and I think Gert and Brad talked about it. We're looking at an industry that is estimated to about $1 trillion in 2030. It is really significant, and this is up for around 300 billion right now. So really more than a threefold increase in the opportunities created. I think we've talked about some of the drivers: income growth, urbanization. They drive fueling this. And with this comes significant opportunities for investments in agriculture and agribusiness. And really, it is this trend that actually shapes the bank's investments and its support to the private sector in the region, because we see all of this. Another interesting thing that is happening, and I think Brad talked about, is in African agribusiness, which is also providing an opportunity for the bank group, is the increase in interest of the private sector. 10 years ago, if you were talking about agricultural investments in Africa, the private sector would be absent. We wouldn't be seeing them. In fact, we had a situation where we struggled to find private sector actors. But now, we're more concerned about issues like land grabbing and other issues rather than the role of the private sector. So we'll see this tremendous increase in the private sector in this. And like I said, these trends actually underscore the bank's strategy for engaging with the private sector. Recently, the bank released its new strategy, which has two ambitious goals: eradicating extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity. We can read about that. But these goals actually are consistent with what we've been doing all along. And central to this, to realizing this strategy, is engagement with the private sector. We do realize that the private sector has significant expertise, capital, that can be used in support of this transformation in Africa. The bank also realizes that the private sector is the main driver of jobs. About 90% of jobs in developing countries are created in the private sector. So if we're serious about jobs, we really need to engage with the private sector. There are three broad areas where the bank provides support. There's a lot more, but I'll just limit it to these three. And I'll give some examples of how we do it. The first is to make sure that we have a policy environment that supports the private sector, that actually encourages private sector engagement. We know that in the past, countries were antagonistic towards the private sector, and they did this in many different ways, legally, in terms of the policies, and not creating the right incentives. So one of the major thrusts for the bank is to ensure that in our engagement with countries, we really try to make sure that
Ade, I'm sorry, because we are asked to reduce the time, so I want to give an opportunity to others also to to speak, because we are behind schedule, and there is a ceremony just after that with the Prime Minister of Cote d'Ivoire, who is already here. So if you allow me, I will give the opportunity to the two others to speak at least 2 or 3 minutes each, because you've passed your 5 minutes. Okay, that's a problem.
Okay, I'll just leave it there. But I just wanted to say that the areas policy support, providing the knowledge from the bank, and also making sure that we address critical constraints.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.